Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Sunday Morning Cup of Ray, brought to you here on the Bucs Report. I am coming to you live today on Facebook, on Twitter, and of course, on YouTube. Thank you for joining me out here today. Just want to welcome everybody. I am here in the Carolina Mountains. Yes, I'm not going to sing Carolina on my mind, but yeah, it was a little trip yesterday. So we made the trip up yesterday. Had a couple of little issues. Ended up not renting the car that my wife Kathleen had set up for me. She'd actually had a Camaro, and she did that for my birthday. I kind of asked, and she played like she wasn't going to. Got to the airport. We had issues with the car, couldn't get the car, so we ended up going home and getting our car. But we still made the trip up. So instead of leaving yesterday morning around 8:30, being here by about 6:37, meeting them in Asheville, we ended up just driving straight through, leaving the house around 1 and got it around midnight. So it was a late night here, but yesterday we drove through the state of Georgia, which is, for those of you who've made the trek halfway back up north here and got into the Carolina mountains or into the Western Carolina area, you know that when you're coming from Florida, you pretty much drive through Georgia. And that pretty much is most of your drive, right? So you have the 4-hour drive out of Florida through Gainesville and up through the state line and then basically through Georgia. And then yesterday we passed through Atlanta, and the big news last week was the passing of 80-year-old House Representative Mr. So the passing of John Lewis there last week on Friday at the age of 80. He announced back in December that he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. A lot of you people may not know the history on Mr. Lewis, and I wanted to talk about that here today because he was such an important part of the civil rights movement of the 60s. But I'm also going to tie that back to a great story I'm sure most of you guys are probably familiar with and have already seen or heard, and that is the story of when John McKay, the Buccaneers' first head coach, and his USC Trojans made the trip in 1970 down to Tuscaloosa and to play the Alabama Crimson Tide in those Bear Bryant-led Crimson Tide in that game in 1970, and the effects that game had on the civil rights movement as well moving forward, and some of the good things that came of that. It's kind of a neat story. It's you've seen probably quite a few documentaries on it, over the years, but it ties back into the whole this year with the Black Lives Matter, and we saw the people protesting. I do want to talk a little bit. I said this last week, it'd be remiss if I didn't do a show and we didn't cover COVID-19 in some way. We saw this week that the NFL and the teams, they announced that it's full steam ahead as far as training camps open. And I know there's some people that are conflicted, right? Because there's a lot of people that are already conflicted on this COVID-19 or the coronavirus issue in the first place, because it's so easily spread. And it can be so dangerous to just anybody, and it's going to depend because we're all microorganisms. We all are going to react to this virus differently. And the thing is, if you've got COPD, pre-existing conditions, diabetes, sleep apnea, your body's just a little off kilter, or even if your body's on kilter, we've seen people affected by this in different ways. But the way this COVID virus is so transmittable, we shut the entire world down in all sports back in March, right? So everything shut down. And so, I'm sorry, excuse me, I want to make sure the sound check we did a sound check earlier. I want to make sure it's still going okay. So we shut down in March, everything stopped. Now we see the NBA players are coming back, or they've been now in that Disney bubble. We see the baseball teams now. The big announcement yesterday that Canada and the city of Toronto, the Blue Jays, will not be able to play there. And we talked about this like a month ago here at the Bucs Report, and that was the fact that the Canadian border between the United States and Canada has been closed. I still don't know. And we talked about the fact that the NHL was looking to have both their cities to have their NHL season. We're looking at, and they're going to both be in Canada. And one of the reasons why you're seeing that, guys, is because the NHL is aware, as Major League Baseball was probably already aware, but they were seeing if Toronto was going to do that. You can't play baseball. You can't. So the hockey's going to have there's two host cities for the rest of the hockey season. But baseball is going to just play pretty much from their own stadiums. Of course, what's still yet to be determined now where those Blue Jays will be playing. But the country of Canada, with the closed border between the United States and Canada, they've kept it really quiet up there. We've talked to our own Justin Faubert here on the Bucs Report, and he lives up there in Canada. But we've also followed in the news that they've been able to keep their numbers down. Each different country, places all over the world have had better luck, and some have had less luck. The United States is going through kind of a hot time right now. And that's where I was talking about, wrapping it back to why I said conflicted a few minutes ago. It's because we see these sports teams moving forward, and the the NFL announces on Friday after that meeting with the owners that they're going to continue moving forward with the start of their regular season or training camps. And the Dolphins down there in Miami, Miami's one of the big hot spots in Florida, and Florida is one of the hot spots in the United States. But when I talk about the confliction, the reason why I say that is because we seem to have people on the left or people on the other side over here that are saying that maybe this isn't as serious as people thought it was. And here's the problem with that. It's contagious. It's a viral contagion. It came on strong. And each year we expect the flu seasons to start late September, early October. It runs through March and April. Then we get into flu season or I'm getting into, allergy season and stuff like that. But they've kind of had a few years to get ready for the flu season. And we saw this coming out of Wuhan, China just in last year. And CDC saw it coming on, but then it did get over to the United States and we saw it spreading. And we did see how fast it got spread, right? We still see people standing in line for 5 hours to get tested. And in some cases, it takes them up to 10 days to get those test results back. Some cases a little more. On average, some cases a lot less, but still it takes a few days. Circles back to the Ryan Jensen thing in the offensive line mastermind summit last week in Houston. And they said they were tested, and it's like, yeah, we get that you're tested, but you still have to at least go through the motions and having respect for it. But then we're talking about the NFL opening their training camps, and we're talking about the city of Toronto not be allowing the Blue Jays to play a game there because they don't want, even though their Major League Baseball is playing more of a limited schedule this year, as far as, like, for example, and I use the Rays because the Rays are my most familiar Major League Baseball team. Oh, by the way, guys, how do you like the shot today? Here at the house, like I said, up here on a mountain on Coleman Mountain Road up here in beautiful Western North Carolina, just outside of Maggie Valley. It's actually right next to the beautiful town of Waynesville, and I suggest it, or I would recommend it if you have a chance to get up here, especially right. And this time of year, it's beautiful, but any time of year, it's so nice to come up here, and we have a great time every year. Come up here on vacation, join my family. Of course, you guys know that they were doing the whole safer at home thing since early April or mid-April when all of this coronavirus became such a prevalent news story, and we saw that the kids were going to be working from home. And my in-laws have a house up here, so they had the Wi-Fi, or they had the satellite installed with the Wi-Fi, so the kids could do all their schooling. And so we try to make the best of a bad situation. But so working it back to the announcement on Friday that the NFL teams are still announcing their camps, and people are like, well, we still have hotspots going all over the country, right? I think as of this morning or as of yesterday, it was like 42 of 50 states were at least seeing not a continuing daily uprise or a continual rising in the cases each day. Then we're starting to see a leveling off of the people actually having as far as being having fatalities related to them in their deaths and stuff like that. But we talked early on about flattening that curve. But the NFL is going to continue moving forward, and we're still looking for a vaccine for this virus, and we're still trying to get. But this is the reason why we talk again about the OL Mastermind Summit, or we talk about the Devin White party last weekend. And I want to go ahead. And I didn't cover it last week, and the Devin White party last Saturday night. That was his second annual fundraiser, and we know that Devin White. We know he loves horses, and we know Devin's committed to that and committed to the horse community, and they have this great way to raise money for his organization, and it's a horse ride or a trail ride, if you will. But then we saw the TMZ Sports video where there were many people were getting together, and it was hot because it's hot this time of year in Louisiana, and they were kind of not doing social distancing. Nobody was really wearing masks that we saw, and then the mayor of the town in which it was held, he was like, they've got to make their own decisions, and that's what it does kind of wrap around to, doesn't it, guys? That we have to make our own decisions. But we here at the Bucs Report, or not just here we are at the Bucs Report, but everybody, we're hoping that we make those decisions to wear those masks, because remember, we're wearing those masks to keep others from getting it, because we're keeping the moisture droplets, or if we should have possibly been exposed to it, should we be coming down with it, we're keeping ourselves from putting it out there in the air. If we're talking, sneezing, coughing in public, we're keeping others from getting it. Now, just like that Disney bubble over in Orlando for the NBA is starting to prove, and then we're going to see it with baseball, NHL, and football, nothing is foolproof. But here's the thing, though. Don't be misguided by the fact that these professional athletes are starting to get their grooves on and getting the leagues going because they're different, these billion-dollar industries. And then take into effect that it's a $500 billion a year gambling industry on gambling on all the sports and all the different types of gambling bets you can place on different teams and all. That obviously this type of a revenue generator is going to continue to move. But I said this last week, and I stand by this. I think I said it last Friday with Peter Blake, that one of the good upsides we can take away from these professional sports and the fact that they're going to get into their camps and get these seasons going and try to get these things successful. We still don't know what's going to happen from day to day, or I was going to say week to week, and then I was going to work at the day to day, but we really don't. But we're going to be able to learn because they've got some of the best professionals in the medical industry and virologists or infectious disease doctors, and they're applying it real time to these leagues because these players in the NBA, they're all over each other. Football, they get that COVID protocol and they're trying to, but you're going to be, you cannot play football and keep social distance. If you're playing football and keeping social distance, it would probably be more like a game of squash, and no one's going to watch a game of squash. I'm just saying that tongue in cheek, but I'm not going to wrap the whole show around that today. But I just wanted to say that let's still continue to wear those masks. Let's still respect social distancing. Yes, guys, it's summertime, right? And everybody's going to have those nights where you want to go to the beach or you want to get out and do a little something, especially if it's something you can do and continue to maintain that social distance. 100, do that. But don't be misguided or take into account that it's a bad thing that we see the players getting back into their different respective, whatever I call it, the Buccaneer bubble, whatever that's going to be. We still don't know what that is going to be, right? As the players are reporting to camp and we get training camp going, hopefully they're going to keep them in small groups and keep them separated. Players, the NBA bubble, they have the players over there and they're kind of locked in. Those family members and the players themselves who've got into that bubble are locked in. So they've really limited their access to outside. Somebody was speaking yesterday on one of the sports shows. It might have been Turf Talk and Mr. Alex Fleming yesterday. By the way, great job yesterday, Alex. I watched that this morning. Everything for me is behind because of being on the road all day yesterday, and I didn't get to watch Justin. Justin's first show of the Audible on Friday night was fantastic. Watched that. Like I said, driving through Georgia yesterday, and then I had a chance this morning to watch Alex Fleming at Turf Talk, and that was phenomenal. Love talking about the NBA because I've been like I said earlier over when I was over at Raymond James last month or a month and a half ago that I've looked at that Disney model or that NBA model they're using for that Disney bubble because I want to see how other leagues, the Major League Baseballs and the NHLs, and of course your NFL and your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, how they're going to incorporate the things that the NBA has already been learning as they put that bubble together. And they got those players quarantined and moving forward because I'm really hoping that as the Buccaneers and those Tom Brady-led Buccaneers and the veterans we have on this team, as well as the rookies and Tristan Wirfs and the young guys, as they get into camp and they start to realize how special 2020 can be and how much it's going to depend on them, even though they're at work and their work entails playing football and you can't do social distancing and you can't wear a mask when you're running full speed on a field. But hopefully they can realize that, just for one season, guys, sure, your frat buddies from college or your guys you played football with because you went into war with those guys every Saturday for 4 years, 3 years, however, or even guys going back to high school, even family members. We'll give you 2021 and beyond, right? 2022. Let's just get this COVID-19 contained. Let's get a quarantine and then have your friends come and stay with you for the weekend. Devin White have your third annual, next year, have your third annual horse ride for charity. And, NFL, have your OL Mastermind Summit in Dallas, because those are fantastic things. And what a great thing to be proud of when you're an offensive lineman in the NFL. It is a small group of men and they share something, and they may not go into battle together on a weekly basis, but they understand what they go through each week getting into that battle, whether you're a retired NFL offensive lineman or currently playing. So all these things moving forward will continue to get going, but let's just get through this time right now. Go to your camps, get in there and train. Let's have a season, but let's try to practice social distancing when we're away from the field. And us, the general public, the fans of these sports, fans of your NBA, the fans of the NHL, your fans of your baseball, and most importantly, again, the fans of your Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the NFL, let us wear the masks and let us practice social distancing. And if you're feeling sick, stay home. Let's get through this, because the only thing, the hardest thing to figure out about this whole COVID-19, besides how infectious it is or how easily you can get it, is the fact that you can get it between 2 days and 14 days as far as getting a full onset of knowing you have it. And then we know it takes time to get tested. So in the meantime, just, make less trips to the store. Try to make our planned trips a little hard. We're all going to work, as the economy started getting going a month and a half, 2 months ago, everything's been going. So let's just all continue to maintain just a little bit of a semblance of intelligence here. And as we continue to take care of this thing, enough on that. I didn't want to rant, but, Alex covered it so well on the NBA yesterday, talking about that Disney bubble and the way the players all reported to camp last week. And we see the news with Toronto Toronto. Figured we had to mention it. Wanted to wrap it back to Representative John Lewis, right? Because we've seen it all weekend. We saw it on Saturday. Of course, again, he passed away on Friday at the age of 80 after battling so bravely pancreatic cancer, so bravely, just like he battled everything else in his life, right? I mean, you're talking about, I'm going to jump around a little bit on I'm going to jump around on Mr. John Lewis, but you know, the thing that gets me when you talk about a John Lewis, right? He actually ended up getting elected to representative in 1986, and he served so valiantly since what? So that makes 34 years. We saw him last year. Not going to get too politically here, guys. You know I don't like to do that, but we saw him last year when he was chairing the impeachment trials over in Congress, or over at the White House, over in Washington D.C. Sorry, but just a great orator, but such a brave man. You talk about brave, right? March 7th, 1965. Group of about 600 people, right, were marching in Selma, Alabama for the rights that they were already supposed to have been granted, the rights to vote, the right to vote. And they marched, excuse me, guys. So they marched, you're talking about marching bravely and for a cause, just like, again, I wrap it back around to how we did this year with the Black Lives Matter and the march for after seeing Mr. Floyd and the way he was, the sad thing that happened there in Minneapolis. But they marched across that city and out on that bridge, and they stood there. Of course, on the other side of that bridge was pretty much the Alabama State Guard and about every police officer in the state of Alabama. And they had just, it was terrible. Those 600 people that had marched there for that right to vote, they stood there, and then they continued to proceed into that, knowing what was happening, knowing that they were going to get beat down, knowing that this was going to happen. And that's pretty much, of course, in 1963, there was a march on Washington, and you saw John Lewis marching with Martin Luther King, and he also spoke there. He was funny because the story goes back that he had his first writing of that speech for that in 1963 on the March on Washington was they used the word a little bit militant, right? Dr. Martin Luther King used the term. He said, let's tone it back a little bit, because they weren't trying, and of course with the Martin Luther King and talking about peaceful protests, but they weren't trying to make the Kennedy administration get all crazy. But so they toned it back a little bit. But still, when John Lewis spoke that day in Washington, his words just rang so true. But, you know, talking about that march in Selma when they marched, and again, just standing out there, knowing they were going into a beatdown, but still doing it so bravely was just phenomenal, right? So that's where we really started becoming not known as the greatest speaker, but being able to speak so passionately about what he felt so strongly about, ended up getting him into the as a representative for this area of Atlanta in Georgia. And again, we drove right through there yesterday, so it seemed prescient. Just something that I was thinking about all day. And then this morning I was up early and I started, I was reading about it on Friday. And of course, we all know who Representative Lewis was, but he was I'm going to read a couple of comments here. Got this out of the New York Times, and of course I have a few tweets. Mr. Tom Brady had a nice tweet, but the valiant stalwart of the civil rights movement and last surviving speaker of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963. That's the march we talked about. Of course, on March 7th was when they marched in Alabama. Originally ordered to, this is again March 7th in 65 when they in Selma. Originally ordered to disperse, the protesters silently stood their ground. The troopers responded with tear gas, bullwhips, and rubber tubing wrapped in barbed wire. In the melee, which became known as Bloody Sunday, a trooper cracked Mr. Lewis's skull with a billy club, knocking him to the ground, and then hitting him again when he tried to get up. That's the kind of man Mr. John Lewis was. And I don't want to get, again, you guys know I just mentioned it a little while ago with the COVID-19. I don't like to get too political and speaking like that, but just when you have a person of the ilk of Representative Lewis, who served so valiantly and bravely, but the things he meant to this country and the civil rights movements through the 60s and such, that, just a great, I always loved listening to him. He was so great for a quote. And even up through the end with what happened again with Mr. Floyd there in Minneapolis, Mr. Lewis by then had gotten deteriorated in health to the point where he wasn't able to make his usual appearance, and you didn't see much of him. But he still said even seeing that still made him cry, but it also still gave him hope, because he saw that the struggle that they stood, well, hope that we were continuing to move, but then when he saw the people marching in the streets and the Black Lives Movement and how it took off, right? Even with the COVID-19, everyone was kind of, and we talk about a perfect storm. We'd all been sheltered in our homes for 2 or 3 months, or people had been sheltered, and they were worrying about and trying to battle this, flattening that curve. And then you see the terrible thing that happened, and marching out there and making it known that we were not going to stand for this type of behavior was just one of the most phenomenal things to come out of what's so far been a pretty crappy 2020, right? I think we all agree on that. But now, as we're starting to get to camp, things are looking turning a little up. But I also wanted to mention, if you will, a couple of tweets I saw, which were just phenomenal. First off, we saw if you don't mind, I'm just going to go ahead and read this real quick from the NFL, the National Football League. This is from Roger Goodell, a commissioner who also said this week that he's going to give up his $40 million, right? Oh, but if I'm getting paid $40 million a year, maybe it becomes a little easier to part with a few $1 million in another year. But just really good thing for Roger Goodell to say that he was going to bypass paying us $40 million this year. Probably kind of like what they're looking to ask the players to do and trying to take some type of a reduction in pay or trying to do something with the salary cap moving forward. Anyway, the tweet that Mr. Goodell had was, the National Football League mourns the loss of an American hero, Congressman John Lewis. Congressman Lewis devoted his life to advancing the causes of freedom, justice, and equality for all. His leadership and courage helped to transform our nation, making it more just. We extend our condolences to his family, friends, colleagues, and constituents, and join them in celebrating his full life, his storied journey, and his unparalleled legacy. Tom Brady had a nice tweet, of course, following up on a little report from the Associated Press on the passing of Representative Lewis. An example of true leadership. Rest in peace, an American hero. Kalis Campbell, love Kalis, right? So thank you for fighting to create a better America for me and my family. I wish I had the chance to get to know you and learn from you. You know, I'm sure you're not alone on that, Kalis. But kind of that's one of the great things about having had him serve in Washington for the last, 34 years, was that even though we personally never got to meet the man, we kind of got to understand the kind of man he was, and we saw what he stood for. And that's why I think his passing on Friday, it touched so many people, and it touched him in such a strong way. I'm not going to get any more statements going, but I just wanted to go and touch on the fact that, again, we lost Mr. Representative Lewis on Friday. But as I told you guys initially, I was going to wrap it back to 1970, right? But basically, it was the end of the 69 season. Not a lot of people realize, and I'm sorry, the sun's starting to peek in, guys, but not a lot of people realize that John McKay, right, storied Hall of Fame coach from the USC Trojans, led them to 6 Rose Bowls. I think it was 3 national championships. But also one thing that John McKay was really well known for, and of course we saw it when he came here to Tampa Bay. You always think he's known for that defense. And he had Wayne Fonts and that defensive staff working on that big defense of 1979, specifically that worst of first defense. But John McKay at USC was known for. So he was the first coach in college football, or any football, but a coach in a big program that took his tailback or his running back and put his running back 12 yards in back of the line of scrimmage. And of course, he would run those sweeps where he would basically pitch the ball to that running back, and then the running back would basically, whether it was a 2-4-6-8 or a 1-3-5-7 hole, the running back would go, and then he would select the best place to run. Excuse me, guys. So a lot of people in college football were like, you can't do that. This has not been done before. What the heck are you doing? And of course, that he would go on to have some great, Sam Cunningham, O.J. Simpson. You're talking about some of the great linebackers of the 60s and 70s went to USC because they became known as Tailback U. And so that was John McKay. And some of y'all may not have realized that because, of course, when he came here, some people always question the fact that John McKay took Ricky Bell over Tony Dorsett. And I always countered, or Bucs fans always counter, with the fact that you can't be sure of how a player would have done. I mean, I know we saw Ricky Bell go through just incredible feats of sports, of courage, but basically of stamina. And the way I never I think maybe once in all of the years that Ricky Bell played here, but I think only one time I saw Ricky Bell come off the field with a clean jersey and a clean uniform, and that was basically because he was he tweaked an injury that he'd had previous early in the game, and so they brought him back to the locker room, and he hadn't yet had it sullied or dirtied. Never saw Ricky Bell leave the field. And maybe that's because a lot of those games back then at the Big Sombrero were probably played in a lot of rainstorms. I'm going to try to get this a little better, guys. So I apologize for that light. Let me see if I can get that. I didn't plan on that coming through. There we go. So Tony Dorsett coming, Dallas takes Tony Dorsett after the Bucs take Ricky Bell at number 2 or number 1, and Tony Dorsett had a Hall of Fame career too. And Ricky Bell ended up, after he played here, he started showing a decline in his play, and he would go out to play for the San Diego Chargers. Of course, by 29, he would be passed on, and we didn't realize that he had that disease that actually attacked his own system, and but he came from USC because he knew what John McKay could do, and he came here and he was a bull for those Buccaneers. And John, you had Doug Williams and the offense trying to get off going, Jimmy Giles and Kevin House, but I'm talking about Ricky Bell was the heart and soul of that defense, and kind of almost like, if from a running back standpoint, how your Mike Allstott, your A-Train would be later on when he came through here. Some people, of course, Mike had just the most incredible hands, and Ricky had, back in those days, those running backs were so big that a lot of times guys didn't go for. You had guys that went in and made the hit, but you had others stripping that ball away, and you'd always see the running backs trying to hold on to that ball, and Ricky Bell just had a way of holding on to that ball. But so after the end of the '69 season, John McKay, who many people don't maybe realize, if you haven't seen any documentaries or any movies or read any stories about the fact that John McKay and Bear Bryant, coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide, were best friends. Best of friends, they'd get together after every offseason. They'd get together out in Palm Desert. They'd play golf every day. They would talk. It was their way of unwinding, which is funny because I'm pretty sure, I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure I never saw John McKay, and I'm pretty sure he was a non-smoker. And of course, Bear Bryant was known for, not chain smoking, but he seemed like he always had a Chesterfield in his hands and be smoking. But, back then it was a different time. But the two of them would get together every offseason. They'd play golf, and they'd undoubtedly, you're playing amongst your peers. So they'd get together and they would just talk about football. And, so we talked about Tom Brady and Peyton Manning on that porch, when they got together back in the day and just talking football. And I would probably say that I would want to be there, a fly on that wall, and listening to Tom Brady and Peyton Manning talking about that football. But I would probably more want to be a fly on the wall listening to John McKay and Bear Bryant talking football, right? Coach of USC and coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide. So basically, story goes, Bear Bryant used to do like football clinics and such, but the Alabama, now we're talking about Representative John Lewis and that Selma March back in 1965. Now, this is 1969, is 4 years later. And even after that, of course, Lyndon Johnson would pass after he saw, especially that beatdown that Representative Lewis took, was one of the major factors in helping Lyndon B. Johnson immediately pass out those voters' rights and making them, across the entire country, making them equal, or at least trying to, right? Even 4 years later, 1969, things weren't still quite changing, right? So you still, especially there in Selma or there in Alabama, things were just, it was, we talk about whatever. So, Bear Bryant, coach, all he was a competitor. He just wanted to win. And anybody who ever played, talk about Joe Namath when he was quarterback under him, he'll tell you he would beat you up in practice. And, Bruce Arians, head coach of your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, coached under Bear Bryant. And I love the fact that Bruce has always got the picture of Coach Bryant behind him. He comes from the Bear Bryant School of Coaching. And I love what Bruce Arians, when he talks about what Bear Bryant taught him, and he doesn't say it was the most important thing he taught him, but what he taught him was when Bear Bryant told him, love him now, hug him later. And if you don't understand exactly what that means, you can almost, because you hear about how Bear Bryant, how tough he was on his players, he'd go up in his he'd be off the field in the big tower. And I love listening to Charlie Hanna talking about this, and one of the things I've read, talking about how when Coach Bryant would be looking down, of course, you didn't have all your video, you didn't have your cell phones. I mean, maybe you had walkie-talkies, but you had walkie-talkies. But Bear Bryant, when he saw something he didn't like, he would come down off that tower, and those players would hear him coming down every step, and just everything just stopped because the master was coming down or the coach was just coming down to just, get in someone's face. Something was, he didn't like something he saw. He was, some would say, a perfectionist. Some would say John McKay was also a perfectionist. So anyway, back, Bear Bryant would have football clinics, and they would have the African American players and then the white players would be separate because they hadn't integrated it. It hadn't integrated fully the football program at Alabama. And Coach Bryant would do his thing, and he'd coach everyone. I don't know what he showed up and did, how long he would stay, but he would do his thing with the teams, and then he would walk across the street to where the African American coaches and players were having the same type of clinic and having it there. At least they were having the clinics at the facility, right? But still, the fact that they weren't integrated together, it's just even 4 years after Selma, but. Bear Bryant would walk over and he would tell the players how great they looked and how good they were doing. And he'd say, we're not able to bring you here to the University of Alabama yet, but I'm going to get you, and we're going to get you in here. He couldn't. Some would say that Coach Bear Bryant was the strongest entity in that state of Alabama, and he could have went up against that. I'm going to say it, that jerk. I hated Wallace. George Wallace was just a hate monger. I hated that guy. Of course, he was the governor of Alabama. And some would say that Bear Bryant was probably the only person in Alabama that would have been big enough to take him head on, to go up head against him and not lose, a PR battle, which, hey, even back then they had PR battles, guys. But anyway, Bear Bryant didn't see it that way, but Bear Bryant, after the '69 season, he's there with John McKay out, probably in the Palm Desert, probably playing golf. And after a round, I could see the two of them sitting there, and Bear Bryant turns to John McKay and he says, I got a proposition for you. Bring your USC boys, bring the Trojans, come and play us in Alabama. Come and play us at Tuscaloosa. Come and see us. Come and play us in a game next year. Of course, college had just added another game that offseason, so they had a game to play with, right? It wasn't all conference and all their prior commitments. They had a game to play with. So Coach Bryant says to John McKay, bring your team to play us, and I'll give you $300,000. $300,000 in 1969 going into the 70 season, that's a lot. It's a lot of money today. Maybe not for your huge, big programs like USC and Alabama, but back in the day, that's a nice chunk of change. John McKay looks at him, thinks about it for a second. He says to him, I'll tell you what, Bear, we'll come and play you guys in Tuscaloosa next year, but the following year, you guys come out to California and play us, right? So right then to jump, shake on it. I'm sure they didn't spit on their hands. Hopefully not in a COVID-19 time. But the two gentlemen make the agreement. The deal is set. Fast forward, first game of the 1970 season, USC flies across the country to Alabama. Now, mind you, in California, we always talk about California. People say, oh, it's so much more liberal or liberated, or people are so, well, they were, USC and UCLA, and they didn't have the issues they were having back in the South as far as segregation or having African-American and Caucasian players playing. They didn't have that issue. Out there, it was just, they were just rolling. It's just guys getting to college and playing a game. I'm not saying stuff didn't still exist or it's a perfect world. I'm just saying it was a little different than what it was back in Mobile, back in Alabama. USC players get off the airplane at the airport. USC players, they're college kids. These kids are 17, 18, 19, 20, sometimes in some cases, maybe 21, but mostly these are still kids that, they're in college, but they're out in they're out in California where things are a little different. They're just doing their hustle. They're learning things in college. They're playing. They get off the airplane in Alabama, and they're on their way to the stadium, these players, and they said that starts to hit them what this game meant. As they're driving through some of the areas of town where there's just some, maybe just, they said, as you're getting to the stadium and they're looking on both sides of the street, and you have your black citizens, your African-American citizens on both sides, and they're on the roofs of their houses. They're running up along the side of the street of the bus, and they're saying, go USC, go USC. And right then, some of the players on the USC team, Sam Cunningham, who that was his first game that he would play, are just like, we're starting to realize how big this game is. We're starting to realize what this game means. It's not just because, they hadn't played since I think it was 46, because USC and Alabama have been big college programs for a lot longer than just the last 50 years. But they hadn't played, and now they're playing. So for them, it was just, we're playing them again. It's the South. It's going to be now they're starting to realize what this game means. And when USC gets off the buses at Alabama and they run out on the field there, they just start putting a beat down on Alabama. Big, strong, and they were there to play. For them, it wasn't just they weren't just going across the country to do a little, let's show up and just play a game. They were there to take care of business, but they didn't go there to take care of business because they didn't realize the racial implications it had till they got there. They didn't realize what this meant. Again, like 4 years or 5 years now after that March in Selma. Bloody Sunday, March 7th, 1965. But these players, they just go out and play their thing. They do their thing. Right? Sam Cunningham, it was his first game. I think it was Sam Cunningham, maybe. But Sam Cunningham, it was his first game, and he ends up rushing the ball 12 times for 135 yards. I think it was 1 or 2 touchdowns. He was just worried. He said he went into the game just worrying about, he just wanted to get playing. He wanted to do well enough to get playing time for the next week. He ends up securing his spot as a starter. John McKay, right? So I know what you're thinking, right? You're thinking that John McKay drives it in. They're gonna take care of business. But remember, him and Brian are friends. But also, more importantly, John McKay is a man who respected the game immensely. So he starts subbing as soon as he realizes that where the way this game's going. He's subbing players, and they're still doing what they're doing because by then those Alabama Crimson Tide are probably beat down. But he starts subbing. And now, mind you, the African-American community couldn't even get into the stadium to watch the game. They're outside listening on radios. They're listening on broadcasts. So they're listening to this game and just listening to it, right? Long story short, I don't want to make it too long on that game, but long story short, week later, all you could get an Alabama resident to say was, well, we got a beating. But what followed shortly thereafter was, boy, we got to get some of those players, some of those good African-American players, some of those great players they saw that USC brought in there. And they started to realize these guys could play ball. These kids were intelligent. These kids were great athletes. They came across the country and they put a whooping on them in their place. And that started the wheels. Some people said more was done in one night than was done in the last decade as far as the civil rights movement. A lot of people disagree with that. May have been a cog or a spoke in the wheel, I would argue, because it was important. Because people some people don't see the rightness for exactly why it's right. Sometimes people will see something because of another reason, but then eventually it comes back around to the reason why it's right. And if it took the citizens or the people of the great state of Alabama to come around to the fact that people should not be based on your ethnicity or your religious beliefs or whatever, that you have your athletes should be able to play a sport together and do their best and excel, and you can go root for them and you can, continue to win. And Bear Bryant for the next decade, I think he coached his last game in 1979, but for the next decade, I think he won four national championships over the next 9 years. Alabama and what he did for that next decade when they started bringing in any players, and it wasn't just based on anything but just the fact that you could play ball. Great little finish in that story. Now, the following year, John McKay had looked at a player from Alabama, young African-American boy. He was looking at a great player. He was a good kid, just solid. Like, God, I wish I remember his name. I don't. Number 80. I think he was a wide receiver, just fast as lightning, great hands, strong and big as the day is long. John McKay made the mistake of mentioning to Bear that offseason that he was looking, after the 70s season, he was looking at a player, recruiting a player from Alabama, and he made the mistake of telling him his name. And back then, you didn't have the internet. You couldn't just go on your phone and find a guy. And heck, you didn't even have digital databases or computing databases where you'd have to worry about them going to rivals.com and getting the background on this kid. Bear Bryant got one of his friends, a judge in Alabama, to go through the phone book and call every. I get the name. I'm sorry, I don't have it. I wish I would have had that. I didn't know I was going to go this deep in the story with you guys, but I had a little time extra. Had him call every name in the book that matched that name. Ended up talking to the young man's father, and of course the judge talked to the father, and then Bear Bryant ends up calling his All-American quarterback who just graduated the year before, and he says, "I'm gonna do Bear Bryant here." No, I'm not gonna do him because he said, "I want you to bring this kid in. This kid's coming in for a visit. I want you to feed him lobster and steak, and I want you to tell him how great the University of Alabama is, and get him to come here." And that young man, again, but he ended up becoming the first African-American football player who was recruited and given a scholarship to play for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Ended up being, he was a defensive end, but he ended up being an All-American. And he would go on and play play at Alabama. And then after the Alabama was done, excuse me, after he was done playing at Alabama, he would go on. He wanted to go to graduate school, and he would call Coach Bryant. He called Coach Bryant, and he called Coach Bryant, and he said, I was wondering, Coach, I'm having a little trouble with funds, and I really want to go to graduate school. And Coach Bryant, excuse me, guys, and Coach Bryant says, why don't you come down here and talk to me, right? So Coach Bryant brings him down into his office, and it's funny because he walks into Coach Bryant's office, and Coach Bryant never looked up when you walked in his office. We've heard this from many people, right? Coach Bryant never walked in when you walked in his office. He never. Sorry, 1 second, guys. When you walked into Coach Bryant's office, he didn't look up. He just kept his glasses on, and you'd walk in, and he said he walks in, he never looks up, and the young man says, Coach, I'd like to go to graduate school, but I'm having some issues. And Coach Bryant never looks up at him. He says, I'm going to offer you a job on my coaching staff. So what is it? Are you going to take it or not? And the young man goes, you didn't say no to Coach Bryant, right? So he ends up taking a job and coaches with Coach Bryant. So he was the first black player for Alabama Crimson Tide who went to Alabama and was recruited after that 1970 game. Not after that game, but probably a big part of that game between John McKay, first coach of the Buccaneers, but USC legend, and Coach Paul Bear Bryant, coach of the USC or coach of the Crimson Tide. That player, John Mitchell. I had to look it up because I knew his name. Currently a coach. I think he's a linebackers coach with the Pittsburgh Steelers. That one's for you, Miss Allison. But yeah, he still coaches to this day. And you go in and you ask him about that, and he'll tell you what that meant. And he ends up getting a job on Coach Bryant's staff. I don't know if he ever made it to graduate school, but some would say he was graduating with a degree in footballology from under one of the greatest coaches of all time, John Mitchell. Actually, so after that season, of course, the next season, Coach Bryant and Coach McKay had already agreed to go play that game in USC. So Coach Bryant brings in Mitchell, gets another player in at the University of Alabama that season. And the coaches, of course, and high schools do this, right? But colleges especially, they'll exchange spring football tapes, looks at their team from the spring. They exchange tapes. USC gives Alabama those tapes. Alabama gives USC those tapes. Alabama gets this new recruit 3 weeks before the game, 3 weeks before the season started against those USC Trojans. Excuse me. So what used to be common practice in Alabama, that all the people from the city and town would come around and watch those Crimson Tide, because they bleed crimson. They would come and watch the practices and see how the team's doing that year, getting ready for the upcoming college season. All of a sudden there were fences and tents, and of course you didn't have your media. I mean, you had your media, but you didn't have your coverage like you do today. You didn't have everybody walking around with a broadcast studio in their pocket. But they put their tents up and they kept it restricted. In fact, they had student athletes from the school going around and making everybody that lived around the stadium there get off of their roofs, because they used to get up on the roof and they'd watch their Crimson Tide play. Had them getting all on a roof. In 3 weeks, Bear Bryant had the Crimson Tide change their entire offense to feature that running back they had, and they went to a wishbone. And of course, they got out to USC to play John McKay and those USC Trojans, and USC was taken aback, and they were beat that game. And John McKay would say he bamboozled him. He changed his offense up entirely. But some people work back to the fact that, could Bear Bryant have realized when he invited Coach McKay and those USC Trojans initially to come to Alabama and play that first game of that 1970 season, did he realize what was going to happen? And most of your people, especially those who played under Coach Bryant, and definitely those who coached beside him, they'll tell you that Coach Bear Bryant would have never invited a game, went into a game, looked forward to a game in which he expected his team to lose. It's just not how he was wired. That's the way Coach Bryant was. And that's the reason why those Alabama teams were so great for so long. But, and I like the romantic heart in me likes to believe, and I'm true. I believe this is true I hold this to be true, that Coach Bryant realized what bringing those USC Trojans to Alabama would mean. For the people of Alabama to be able to see the fact that these athletes, regardless again of race, color, or creed, that came from USC came into play as team and hopefully gave them a good game, undoubtedly he probably realized that there would be some good of it. Did he think that they would lose that game? Did he go into that game with an inkling that they would lose that game and it would have the impact in the state of Alabama, and maybe some would say for the entire South moving forward? Ole Miss. I'm not going to go into a bunch of colleges, but then we started seeing the turnaround recruiting and everything. No, he didn't think they were going to lose. I just realized, guys, sorry, I am crooked, but I'm on it. I just want you guys to know the reason I'm moving weird lately. I'm on a hill here, so one leg's been lower than the other the entire time. So I apologize for that, but just a great story, and I guess it works back to Coach John McKay, probably. Tony Dungy, John McKay, John Gruden, close third, because he came in here and he got that Tony Dungy team over the hump. Great coach. Pound that rock. And of course, now you got Bruce Arians and other coaches in between here and there over the years. Other coaches have gone on from the Buccaneers and had more success elsewhere, but good people just the same, I'm sure. I'm working back to accept Richard Williamson and his 3-a-days. He was a jerk. I'm kidding. Let me just go over a couple of your comments if you guys don't mind real quick. So I have the comments here, so I'll just read some comments. Joshua Logan says, go Bucs. Jonathan Maharg says, what's the over-under for how many sacks old man Brady takes behind our bad line? Good question there, Jonathan. I'm going to say that, looking back at Tom Brady and his time in New England, a lot of times the way a defense would get to him would usually be on a secondary blitz, one of the defensive backs blitzing, or maybe a linebacker on a blitz, but you didn't really get to him a lot with the front four or front three. And I think that we already have plans for that, as far as not knowing exactly. I don't think we know for sure what Donovan Smith's going to decide, but I believe moving forward that we have enough tight ends and we have enough skill on the offensive side of the ball that we'll be able to still pull that ball down. Is he going to take a sack? Well, you don't play the game if you expect to never get touched. I've seen games where Tom Brady seemed to not get touched when he was playing for the Patriots. But anyway, let's see here. Johnny Dean says you can also find. Oh yeah, please guys, I am on YouTube and I'm on Twitter here. The Cup of Ray is on the Bucs Report YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook page. So follow me over there sometime, and we'll get better with doing the messages too. Tracy Chandler says, hello, Johnny. Mike Stover says, labs have also been guilty of overinflating the positive. We'll see. Okay. Government accountability, as far as, we go back to the 80s and we talk about, making a $900 hammer and the Department of Defense and how they inflate that Department of Defense budget. Some would say I think they still spend a little too much on Department of Defense. If we spent more on Department of Friendship, we could probably cut down some of that defense expenditure. I'm not going to get political, but I'm just saying that have the numbers been inflated? I don't know the answer to that. One could say maybe yes, maybe just out of an abundance of caution, because of the fact that this thing, you can literally, and somebody can literally go, and they can literally get it. And then they can take it home and give it to their 80-year-old grandmother or visiting cousin who they didn't realize with her COPD it was going to become deadly. For them, it's just a rough sniffle. Oh, pump up the vitamins and let's get through this. I get that. But the fact of the matter is, for a lot of people or for a portion of society, it's a deadly thing. And you can't know you have it until you've actually been either tested and confirmed that you have it and you're asymptomatic and you had no idea you had it, or you've got what appears to be a pretty bad flu. Hopefully that's as bad as it gets. So, we don't want to go there, guys, but let's just wear the masks, keep the social distance. Let's get the players into track and continue to learn, and let's get our sports on. Okay. And then we'll look forward to that football season, but it's okay. Thanks for commenting, Mike. Pewter Girl says, hi, Johnny and Tracy. Sitten says, loved it. Oh, I appreciate you, Sitten. Yeah, no, I appreciate you. I love you loving the show. That's what I do it for. Mike Stover says, by the way, I'm not going to even go there. He's talking about the name of the offensive team. I'm sure maybe there's a point there, but he's talking about that the team. Hopefully, we'll never hear that name of that team again. I'm sure they're going to have to go back through all the ESPN classics and take out every reference to the name. But I don't think it's got to be like that. But they're going to try to. And they have the people, the ESPN, and they have a staff that can go through all those tapes and remove them. So anyway, that's enough for the comments today, guys. I just want to say again, thank you for joining me here from the great state of North Carolina in the Western North Carolina mountains. I probably should have had a better script today, because anytime I'm talking about, again, Representative John Lewis, or trying to talk about COVID-19, I probably should have a pretty baseline script to go by. But traveling all day yesterday, I didn't really have anything. I just got up this morning and I was doing a little last minute research. The funny thing was about that John McKay and that Coach Bear Bryant story is that I had that going in. I had that in the bag anyway, right? Because I had read something a while back, and then I saw recently it come pretty much. If you want to see, it's called it's on Showtime, and it's an hour. It's only an hour long, but it has Charlie Hanna, former Buccaneer offensive lineman. It has Coach John McKay, but it talks about Coach McKay and how he coached the USC Trojans in that game between him and USC and Alabama. But it's a great, and they pack a lot of information in 1 hour, and I love anytime you go back and because I was 7 when John McKay went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I knew him. I knew him as the guy who wore that, the yellow or the orange windbreaker and that fishing hat, and he would walk the sidelines and do this. And I knew he would make the comments where, what do you think about your offense's execution? And he's like, I'm all for it, right? Or just some of the great one-liners. He was probably next to, you had coaches that could say one-liners, but I would actually compare John McKay to Bruce Arians, because Bruce Arians is never short on one-liners, but very entertaining coach. But I knew him as the guy who walked the side. Now come to think of it, did he smoke cigars? Maybe I saw him. Maybe even it was in that '79 season when they were in victory. I don't want to speak for that. I don't want to say definitively, but I think I remember John McKay at one time puffing on a cigar. But it's neither here nor there. But again, I had that story in my back pocket, and then when the passing of Lewis, Representative Lewis on Friday, and just what that meant, and then over the weekend you start seeing all those tweets and what he meant to everybody. Everybody in the NFL and NBA and sports in general, and you get all these athletes talking about the great accomplishments that Representative Lewis had, and then just the bravery, standing there with 600 people marching across that bridge in 1965, just knowing that beatdown was coming, but knowing that this had to be done. I think there's a lot of us out there that I like to think I would be brave enough if put in that position. I like to hope that I would, especially if I saw someone in trouble or I needed to, run towards the fire, not away from it, unless there's firemen over there and they're saying get away. But I like to think that I would be brave enough and hopefully be able to do that in a situation. But I don't know. 600 people crowded onto a bridge, and that a beatdown's coming, dogs and sticks and just stuff like that. Representative Lewis and family and friends and all who were touched by, whether it just be by knowing the man and the things he did, or just by the legislation that he helped get through and the things he said over the 50 years that we knew of him in the public eye. We're thinking about you. You're a good guy, a good man, and you will not be forgotten, not anytime soon, that's for sure. So anyway, again, thank you for joining me for my kind of improvised cup of Ray here this morning. I honestly am not maybe I have a few minutes or two. Just wanted to work it back. I wanted to go ahead and throw in there again. Fantastic job on Friday night, the Audible with Joshua. Again, yesterday, Turf Talk with Alex Fleming. Loved it. And I'm going to say it right here, Alex, because some of y'all out there that watched it, you may be wondering, because we know Alex, right? His show's called Turf Talk, and he'll talk football. In fact, he's given me some of the best football knowledge in the last couple of years, right? Talking about those Baltimore Ravens, Alex. But so he starts to show off yesterday, and he just jumps right into it. And of course, the most prescient news, or the biggest breaking news as far as the COVID-19 and moving forward, was the NBA bubble, because they've been you're starting to see the players, they're live, ESPN's live over there. The football camps are still like hidden at their facilities, and Major League Baseball, I don't know what they're doing. I think hockey, they're all on a frozen pond, and I have no idea where. But the NBA, we're starting to, and again, we're learning from that. We're going to take the things we can learn from these leagues and hopefully continue to see a progression of progress, or a movement of progress toward the COVID-19 and getting this under control and getting rid of it. But Alex starts talking about the NBA, and I find myself just captivated. He's dropping knowledge that I didn't even realize that I wanted. And he's talking about the players and talking about some of the masks they're showing up with. And he's saying some are talking, even though they're not talking, they're talking. And he's talking about this and that. And of course, we talked about Zion Williamson getting out of that bubble last week due to a family emergency. And we know that we said early on that players that have to leave the bubble, especially if it's for an example or for a family emergency, or you're having a child, or maybe a passing in the family, that they can work their way. They're not going to let players just go out. They're not going to let they weren't going to let the NBA players run the Devin White's second annual charity event, the horse ride, and, have a Saturday night and then come running over and put them back in quarantine and get them back in the bubble after successfully testing over a specific period of time. But in Zion's case, it was a family thing, and hopefully we get him, and if he's not already getting back in there, we get him back in that bubble, because I think a lot of you out there, if you do watch the NBA at all, you're probably hoping to see some of Zion this year for the Pelicans, right? Good for them. But I wanted to say I saw a story today or this weekend on Pro Football Talk, and isn't it just New England's way, right? Because I'm sure this is going to be true across the entire league, because honestly, guys, are there going to be fans in the stadium? Don't really know. Do we want to see fans in the stadium? Yes, we do. Do we know if there are fans in the stadium, how many? We saw NASCAR last week had 20,000 people announced at the race, right? Hopefully there's been no flashback on that. Hopefully there's been no blowback. We haven't heard anything as far as there's been any viral infection or something like that. So are they starting to, had to wear the masks in, had them social distance? Of course, a NASCAR track is a lot bigger than a football stadium and a lot bigger than a baseball stadium. Lord knows bigger than a hockey stadium. So, and NBA. So, but the New England Patriots are talking about the fact that they've announced that, there's going to be limited tickets, maybe 20,000, I think they set the limit at. And of course, immediately, typical New England always got to figure out a way to spin a news cycle, like getting a fine for whatever, and then signing Cam the same night, which just happens to happen 30 minutes after the fine comes down, right? So you figure that's one thing. They've got the because we talked about how the Buccaneers won this offseason in the media press, but they're talking about the fact that in New England now, all of a sudden, these 20,000 a game per se, these tickets are gone. And the prices are just outrageous. And I would argue that the prices to go to Raymond James to see Tom Brady and Gronkowski and Evans and Godwin and that defense, that Devin White, for me, again, it's the defense. But I would argue that you'll find that those seats, if they announce there's going to be a specific amount of number of people, that those seats will be gone quick, and the value on those will no doubt go up. Of course, we here at the Bucs Report are going to have those games covered for you here, so that we can bring everything that's happening, the news, the interviews, the press conferences, the team going 16-0 and winning Super Bowl 55 at Raymond James Stadium. Hey, let's dream, right? So stay tuned to the Bucs Report. Again, we're on the Landry Football Network. And you also can find me here on Sunday mornings on the Bucs Report Facebook page, the Bucs Report Twitter page, and of course the Bucs Report YouTube page. So check all of those out. Just hope you guys like my shirt, right? Shout out to my friend Aaron. Had him especially make these shirts, and I got a line of people now that want them. Of course, the BR. That's the iconic Bucs Report logo, very comfortable shirt. The reason why I went with it is because it's a high quality cotton. So I was like, yeah, definitely. Although even here in the mountains of North Carolina here on July 19th, it's a little warm. So I'm going to let you guys go. I'm going to go get breakfast, and we're going to go on a family hike because I hadn't seen my family since April. So thank you for joining me here today, guys. I hope I said something throughout this show that maybe raised a little passion, or maybe you're interested and you want to go back and watch for it later. Don't forget, you got Peter Blake and the Sports Web 5 nights a week. We have, I think, Nick Citro, we have his Ask Anything session. We have his Ask Me Anything sessions. Then we have Charles Richardson on Thursday nights, I believe. And of course, we have Joshua on Friday nights with the Audible. We have Alex on Saturdays with the Turf Talk. And you have me here on Sundays with Cup of Ray. Hope you guys have a great weekend. And of course, if you ever need to ask me anything or hit me up, do it on Facebook. Do it on Twitter. Don't forget, it's PUTRPOWR02. You guys saw me probably on the Peter show the other night mention that it's not putter power, it's pewter power. You just have to imagine that you being along. Thanks for joining me here today. I hope you guys have a great Sunday and continue having a great, safe week. Wear our masks. Stay social distance. Let's have a little fun. Starting to get towards some sports seasons here, and things are going to get a little bit better. Thanks for watching, everybody.